In this video, we're going to be talking all about the brand sets and what the hell's going on. This is something I've really wanted to do for quite a long time, simply just because there's a lot in the game now that is completely unnecessary. So this will potentially help newer players, more experienced players, or if you're just wanting a talking point. And essentially, what I'm going to be doing is effectively rating or ranking a lot of the brand sets. We're not going to be doing gears in this one, just brand sets, as to whether or not they're actually any good, if there's like key points within them that are actually worthwhile and can be used, niche style of building, or whether or not they're actually just completely dead weight, meaning their best use is literally just to dilute the loot pool, whether or not they should have a rework, what that rework could potentially be, or just outright get rid. Now obviously this is all going to be of my own opinion, and the inspiration for it is going to be quite simply how I play. So you might not agree, you might completely agree, you might think I'm an absolute idiot. That's perfectly fine. However, the key point to all of it is going to be sort of, does it really actually have a place within the game on how the game actually functions? This doesn't mean whether or not you can have fun with it. Just because you can take a go-kart to a Formula 1 track doesn't actually mean you're going to do anything worthwhile, regardless of whether or not you personally have fun. So we're going to start off with the blue cores, and the first one on the list obviously is 511. 511 comes with 30% health, 30% incoming repairs, and 30% hazard protection. The health is kind of nice now. There are a few builds and where we're able to actually just chunk up a bunch of health, which can kind of make you tanky. But in the long run, it's not really that worthwhile, simply because tanky isn't really something that kind of suits this game, because in order to do that, we would want some actual form of damage mitigation, which would be so much more preferable, as well as aggro control for a player rather than just an item such as the decoy. Incoming repairs, I very rarely see. The main areas I do see it pop up is in PvP, and even then it's probably still questionable. The only real benefit to 511 is going to be the 3-piece, and that's to get 30% hazard protection, and there are quicker, cleaner and easier ways to get to that sort of value. Honestly, 511 just needs a complete rework. Up next is Badger Tough with 10% shotgun damage, 5% total armor, and then 15% armor on kill, if I'm not mistaken. I don't really see this get used in any capacity. The armor on kill, 15%, is pretty nice, but once we start moving down the list, you'll see that there's something else which basically trivializes that. 5% armor isn't really enough to make any form of worthwhile dent, and now thanks to things like expertise, 10% shotgun damage is mostly worthless. Like, it's actively not giving you anything. You'd be better off going for things like Chestguard, Grupo, even Providence for their 13% headshot damage. That it's just no longer really worth it. Badger Tough, absolutely. Honestly, I'm actually at a point where things like Badger Tough, Fenris, etc., they just at this point should just be removed from the game and just find something else to work into them. The Bellstone Armory, 1% armor regen, 10% armor on kill, and then 45% incoming repairs. It's an awful lot. Like, who is putting 3-piece Bellstone on? 2-piece Bellstone is really good. It's actually pretty strong and was one of the better ways in which to get like an early performing armor on kill type build. But again, we now have another better source, so I kind of feel like this needs slight tweaking. Maybe go for like 15% armor on kill and like 2% armor regen to really give it a bit more oomph. But Brazos, 10% skill haste, the skill tier, and then 50% magazine size. I know a lot of people really like this set. However, now that especially Picaro's holster has been nerfed, Brazos has massively fallen off. I really like the idea of the 2-piece giving a skill tier. I don't feel like the skill haste is actually worth much. And I'll leave the 50% magazine size to you. I know a lot of people put a lot of stock into it. I personally don't, especially considering the amount that you're going to be compromising just to get to that point. But yeah, since the changes to Picaros, I feel like Brazos is basically no longer worth it, really, in any form of capacity, minus trying to get like a free skill tier out of the two-piece. Guard, 5% total armor, 60% health, 2% armor regen. 5% total armor is mostly worthless. So the 60% health for the most areas of where Guard gets used is kind of null and void. 2% armor regen, again, is mostly an situation. And the main reason for this is the only real piece that get off Guard that gets used is Point Man for Perfect Vanguard. And then normally the other pieces are like Foundry. So yeah, it just doesn't fit with what it is used for within its intended purposes. Golden Gear, it's like 8.3% status effect now, 1.5% armor regen, and then 10% total armor. The 1.5 armor regen is really weird. The reduction in status effect hasn't really changed that much. A lot of status effect builds are still up there and very powerful. Going for that 10% total armor, I don't think I see anyone doing outside of maybe PvP, and I normally see them as like experimental PvP builds. Golan is kind of fine where it is. I just wish that 10% total armor was like, I don't know, 10% damage mitigation. That would be so much better. Just 10% damage mitigation rather than total armor. Habsburg, 13% headshot damage, 20% marksman rifle, and then 25% status effect. The first two are fine, the headshot damage and then the marksman rifle damage, perfectly fine, other than having to farm unicorns. I kind of feel like they're doing it on purpose at this point, just to try and slow or create issues with farming, so people have to spend longer in the game. But then they add things like countdown, which is bizarre. The 25% status effect is absolutely bizarre, weird placement that absolutely requires some form of change. No one in their right mind is doing 3-piece Habsburg in a serious manner at all. Ling mode, 20% explosive resistance, 20% skill haste, and then 30% LMG damage. Obviously, this has actually kind of blown up a little bit lately, just because of how LMGs are now working, especially with something along the lines of Pestilence. But it's all about that 30% LMG damage. No one cares about the explosive resistance. No one cares about the skill haste. Now, those two could be good, but then we've got really weird LMG damage at the end, or we've got really good LMG damage and two really weird brand sets to start with. And even then, the gains that either one would give you, depending on how you would build, don't really outperform like the next options by a huge margin, to a point of where you could argue it's worthwhile. Just kind of like an example, a lot of people I know that use the 3-piece Lengmo Pestilence build have mostly stopped using it and just gone back to using Pestilence on Strikers, because it just does so much more and they're clearing content so much faster. Uzina for 5% total armor, 10% armor on kill, 30% hazard protection. I feel like this has a very worthwhile place within PvP. I'm not too sure though. Just as like a bit more of a tanky Has-Pro-y type build, you get 5% total armor, obviously. If you do get a kill, you get 10% of it back, and normally PvP builds are very on the blue core side, and 30% hazard protection, so you can, you know, not be affected by hazards. Overall though, in terms of like content, this does see a place within the raid communities as a Has-Pro build for Boss 3 in the Iron Horse raid, as well as what we call Foam Alley. It does have a place, it's just very, very niche. Outside of that, most people would use Uzina simply for the closer, or is it closer, whatever you would like to call it, the perfect spotter named chest. Now we have Jarl, which is 10% hazard protection, 10% weapon damage, and then 40% pulse resistance. Due to the way in which expertise is now working, 10% weapon damage, it sounds like a good buff, but it's honestly, it's just made immediately redundant. because of expertise. So where this gets used is 10% hazard protection for a few PvE as well as PvP builds. And I also do believe that the 3-piece Jarl is actually something that is used quite regularly as like an anti-Heartbreaker build within PvP. So in PvP, the 3-piece Jarl would actually be quite strong, I imagine, but that's really about it. And then we have what is actually currently the strongest Blue Core brand set at the moment, and a lot of people were really excited for this one. Palisade still works, and it's just quite simply because the one piece gives 10% armor on kill. Don't get me wrong, the 60% health is kind of nice if you want to go down that route, but it's not really that great and is completely overshadowed by the one piece giving 10% armor on kill. And then the 3-piece, we get a skill tier, which seems weird placement because we can get a skill tier at 2 pieces from Brazos. So yeah, bit of a weird thing mix up here, but yeah, 1-piece Palisade is absolutely king of the armor core brand sets at the moment. So just like a quick summary kind of thing, 5.11, honestly at this point either completely rework it, and by rework I don't mean just change the values, I mean give it entirely different stats. What you have on there, or like the health, who cares? Incoming repairs, who cares? Hasbro is nice, but to go through all of that just to get to it kind of seems a bit weird. So it either needs a rework or just get rid. Badger Tough at this point just needs to get rid. Bellstone is kind of nice, the 1 and 2 piece, but going for the 3 piece is redundant. Due to the nerf to Picaro's holster, Brazos is kind of in a weird place. I feel like a lot of people like it just because they like it, but it's not actually necessarily good. The only standout piece for Gilligard would be Point Man, which to me means the entire set just needs to be reworked. Golan, I kind of have a soft spot for, just because I really like my status effect builds, and like I'm that style of support player, so I like having the status, but the 1.5 armor regen and then the total armor seems very, very weird to me. And rework. Habsburg, just change the third one. Do like 30% armor on headshot kill. 30% armor on headshot kill. There you are. You're giving people a reason to go for 3-piece Habsburg. Like that 20%, that status effect, is it 20%? I've forgotten. Like utterly ridiculous. 25% status effect. It's ridiculous. Like why? So rework. Lengmo, I'm just gonna say straight rework. It's a very, very bizarre overall set. Uzina, I kind of want to say rework, but it's also like one of the tankier, more overall higher performing Blue Core sets. It's just more of a, I would say, rework because I just don't use it that much. Jarl, again, I would like to say rework, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not in any place to demand or make changes to PvP. I'm not a PvP player. Palisade, I don't like the health. The skill tier is absolutely weird, but that 10% armor on kills, I'm going to say leave it alone, because if they do decide to rework it, guaranteed we'll get that 10% armor on kill removed. Now, annoyingly, the Blue Core brand sets are absolutely in the worst place possible, simply just because tanking within the Division 2 isn't really a thing. I know people like to argue it. I know people like to make builds with all these blue cores, and they're like, oh, but I can clear content so easily. But the overall like performance of tanking just doesn't really exist within the Division 2. Outside of utilizing things like the Bulwark Shield, that can be pretty tanky. You can get a serious amount of health on that, as well as buffing it with things like the Foundry set. Outside of that, in terms of straight armor, you're not really going to be doing anything. We do have protection from elites, which does give a hefty amount of damage mitigation, but only against elites. I personally only use my PFE build against rogues or hunters if I'm doing countdown, or potentially if I'm feeling crazy and do like floor 100 summit. I would genuinely argue for like a lot of the tankier sets to actually be viable within the vast, like a larger spectrum. We would either need to like get to a point of where we can have like 20% armor regen, but that's really going to mess with PvP, or get actual damage mitigation. Rather than a blue core just increasing our armor value, have the armor value like decreased by 50%, but each blue core would mitigate 10% damage, all damage. So with 6 blue cores, we would have just under 1.3 million armor, I believe. Probably about the equivalent we'd get for about blue cores, or 3 blue cores now. But we'd also have 60% damage mitigation. You could also then have it that the more blue cores you have, the more aggro you generate. So this way you actively are, as a tank, supporting your team. You're mitigating damage, you're able to take the damage, and you're drawing the aggro. Until these sort of changes get made, tanking within the Division 2 is really, really, really limited to literally just what we call key tank and stagger tank within the Iron Horse raid, as well as tankier builds within PvP. But they're still mostly DPS builds, they just have blue. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. We'll be back at some point going over the brand sets that have the skill tier, and then we'll finish off with the red core, weapon damage, brand sets, and then we'll move into gear sets. However, in the meantime, have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.